Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. So, before we were start, let us bow down our heads and put ourselves in the holy presence of God. For those Catholic, please make sign of the cross. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this reporting. Help us engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community. This is all I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So, we are the first reporters, and our topic is the Mongol Empire, which is the literature of Genghis Khan. The Mongol Empire. The Mongol acquired the world's largest land empire. Also, the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous empire in history. He himself conquered the largest amount of territory by any single conqueror, larger than Julius Caesar, larger than Napoleon, larger than Alexander the Great, or anyone else. They were a pastoral, nomadic people from the region of Mongolia, which consisted of family clans unified by Temujin in the 1160s. So, we have here a short video clip on the Mongol Empire.
In 1162, deep in the heart of Asia, a child was born. He was clutching a blood clot, a sign from heaven that he was destined to be a great warrior. His life was to become a legend. His name, Genghis Khan. Many believe his story is simple, that he was the incarnation of evil, a brutal barbarian who butchered millions. But the real character of Genghis Khan is far more intriguing. How did this illiterate outcast turn the feuding tribes of Mongolia into a powerful nation? And how did he transform the Mongol hordes into a ruthless and disciplined fighting machine? An army with revolutionary tactics and ingenious weapons that ultimately stood poised to conquer Europe. And why on his deathbed did he believe his divine mission remained unfulfilled?
Soon I will know death, but I will never know my destiny.
Shortly after his death, his heirs gathered their memories into an epic account of his life. They called it The Secret History of the Mongols. Evidence from Chinese and Persian sources, the work of leading scholars, and the secret history allow this to be the most complete television portrait of Genghis Khan ever made. The characters are all real historical figures, and the words of Genghis Khan are rooted in the great speeches of the secret history. This is the story of how that tiny fist turned to iron and came to rule the largest land empire ever known to man. In 1215, the Mongol warrior Genghis Khan led his army to Beijing, capital of northern China. After fighting his way across Asia, the city stood before him. But Beijing was protected by formidable defenses. Surrounding it was a wall 12 meters high and 30 kilometers long. And behind the wall was one of the world's most advanced armies. First, Genghis Khan besieged the city. Then he ordered an audacious attack. He forced enemy prisoners to fill his front lines. He built new weapons to attack the city's defenses. Finally, having endured the Chinese arrows and bombs, he commanded his Mongol warriors to scale the walls. Genghis Khan sensed victory was within his grasp. Beijing was fighting for its life. A poor nomad from the remote Mongol steppe, Genghis Khan had made an extraordinary journey. The boy who had become Genghis Khan was called Temujin. He was the son of a tribal warrior chief. When he was only 9 years old, he received news that was to change his life.
My father had been poisoned by a rival tribe. My mother told me my father's enemies were forever the enemies of my own heart. From that day, I would never be a child again.
As the eldest son, Temujin grew up to lead what was little more than an extended family. And on the steppes, a small tribe was weak and vulnerable. To survive, Temujin knew he must forge links with other tribes, and there was only one way he could do that.
Her name was Borte. There were only two things to know about my marriage. She was a woman of beauty, and the sable fur they gave us was worth 1,000 of the swiftest horses.
Mongolia were locked in a spiral of murderous vendettas. There was only one law on the steppes. If a man wanted something, he took it. Now, Temujin had something another man wanted. The Merkit tribe had feuded with Temujin's father. Now Temujin himself was in danger. And especially vulnerable was his new wife. secret history records what Temujin, the man who would one day be Genghis Khan, did next.
I'd taken my wife. I knew what I had to do.
What Temujin had to do was to escape.
Only a fool fights a battle he knows he cannot win.
Wife stealing was common on the steppes. Borte knew she had no choice but to submit.
I had just one friend I could trust, Jamukha. As children, we had sworn the vow of Ander. It was the most sacred vow of all. We were blood brothers. A bond that joined our lives as one. With my sworn brother Jamukha, my power had been increased by heaven and earth.
At the Merkit camp in the mountains of northern Mongolia, Temujin went looking for his wife.
We made the Merkits pay for their deed. We destroyed their families and emptied their breasts.
Temujin, the man who was to become Genghis Khan, was barely 20, and he'd already eliminated one of Mongolia's great tribes. In those early days, Temujin and Jamukha shared the leadership of the tribe. Yet even as they celebrated the victory over the Merkits, there was a hidden tension between them. At the root was a fundamental...
Characters. So we'll start with the main character, which is Genghis Khan. He was born in 1162 near Lake Baikal in Mongolia and died on August 18, 1227. He was a Mongolian warrior ruler and one of the most conquerors of history. He was also a Mongolian ruler who became one of the world's most powerful military leaders, who joined with the Mongol tribes and started the Mongol Empire. He was a Mongol emperor who was very successful in battles. Before he was named Genghis Khan, he had another name in the past called Temujin. So the honorary title Genghis Khan is possibly derived from the Turkic Tingis, meaning sea, making his title literally oceanic ruler, interpreted figuratively as universal ruler. So while we have the main character, we also have the minor characters. So let's start with the warlord. He is the one who invaded of the territory of the Jin. We have Wang Yan Yongji, the mighty emperor of the Jin, and we have Borte. She was one of the people in Okhang tribe and the wife of Temujin.
Tungrul, another formidable leader who had another alliance of Temujin. Jamukha, the son of Mongolian tribal leader and one of Temujin's greatest friends. Tingre was the chief deity worshipped by the ruling class of the Central Asian steppe people in 6th and 9th centuries. Ogoday Khan, Genghis Khan's son and successor, and had a lust for land and spoiled every bit as insatiable as his father. Ala ad-Din Muhammad, ruler of Khwarezmid Empire. The Merkits, they are the one who ambushed Temujin and kidnapped his bride. The Mongols, they are the people who are being led by Genghis Khan.
Setting, place, Central Asia and East Asia of China and Russia. The places are now divided into Outer Mongolia and Inner Mongolia. Time, the Mongol Empire of the 13th and 14th century was the largest contiguous land empire in history. From 1206 until 1368, the Mongol Era, called Yuan Dynasty, or also called Mongol Dynasty, established by Mongol nomads that ruled portions and eventually all of China from the early 13th century to 1368.
Black. This fact-based epic traces the early and tumultuous years of legendary warriors Genghis Khan, then known as Temujin or Tadanubu Asanu. Despite the killing of his father, the betrayal of his friend, and even being forced to serve as a slave, Temujin still creates his own path for future greatness. He hones his battle skills and marries Borte, Kolan Kolun, whose love and reliability are crucial, often overlooked elements to his historic success as a conqueror.
Climax. Year 2004, Genghis Khan and his blood brother Hamuka fight each tribes. Due to the decision of Hamuka to have his own loyalty and to his own will that they might as well fight each other. So, as I watched the movie, this part makes me think to be the climax because it's already towards a solution, which is the plan of Genghis Khan to settle on everything, on every place in the west side. So, but because the decision of Hamuka to have his own loyalty, the plan was stopped and fighting each tribes of Genghis Khan and Hamuka exist. But suddenly, the tribes of Hamuka was lost, and Hamuka faced the consequences of the Genghis Khan tribes, which is the death.
Following action. The Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire that ever existed. The Mongols succeed at subduing and controlling people of so many different regions, languages, and religions means that running the empire was always extraordinarily challenging. In China, the Mongols could maintain their rule better than else because this strong Chinese tradition of centralized state power supplied a stable framework of governmental organization. But ultimately, the empire began to fragment as the central government in China weakened. Kublai Khan was one of China's greatest emperors during the Yuan dynasty or Mongolian dynasty China in 13th century in year 1206-1368. Dynasty established in China by Mongol nomads. Cutting control of southern China, the Mongols established their capital at Beijing Dinkodado. Despite this happened in the entire years in the Mongol Empire, but this still remained undissolved.
Resolution. Genghis Khan sent his messenger to Karakum and Persia to settle everything and to be as one of their services. Many places in the west side visited by Genghis Khan and talked each kings to settle everything, but some places rejected and doesn't give their loyalty services to Genghis Khan. So in the story, Genghis Khan decided to send his messenger to Karakum and Persia, since some boxes symbolizes the settledness between the war of each tribes. But as the other tribes rejected the settledness of Genghis Khan, especially the China, Genghis Khan decided to fight the tribe of China. So as they fight each other tribe, the king of China watched until his sulugoon or alipin nangamatay. So he thinks that as his alipin nangamatay, so he decided to kill herself because kabalo na siya nga mamatay na kung siya kay na lusog na sila sa ilahang lungga. So this part is the last part of the movie. So it makes me think that this is the problem solved, because after all, Genghis Khan known to be a great leader, and his all tribes the Mongol.
Theme. The main theme of this book is definitely a war, since the book addresses the problems with war and how the Mongols did their fighting. The book discusses the modern point of view on the Mongol strategies in their overtakings. The Mongols use psychological warfare. By the way, the psychological warfare means it also called psy-war, the use of propaganda against an enemy, extremely successfully in many of their battles, especially in terms of spreading terror and fear to town and cities. They often offered an opportunity for an enemy to surrender and pay tribute instead of having their city ransacked and destroyed. By the way,
They conquered 32 nations and won 65 battles for Mongolian Empire.
One of the main themes this book is human right. The Mongols used to kill everyone that stood against them, and often innocent people on their way. Therefore, it is quite certain that they did not care about human rights, even though officially there were no human rights at that time. It was still a question of right or wrong with the human around you, and therefore, if for not human rights. A binding together of the nomad clans and the merciless punishment of wrongdoing. It concerned itself with people, not property unless a man actually confessed. He was not judged guilty unless he was caught in the act of crime.
So the weather condition of the Mongol people was combination of cold, dry, and persistent wet. So what was the Mongol environment like? So the Mongol Empire had an unexpected beginning. So one means a blessings or a biyaya because of the weather of the Mongol have initially privileged due to 15-year-long stretch of mild weather and above average of moisture that produce abundant grasses of their horses and conditions of livestock breeding. So based on Nabasa and based based sa akin na research na ang the Mongol Empire good sa una is kapit ko sila kablasin sabihin sa mga horses. So the specific building or place where the Mongol lives is yurt or burg. So yurt have been primary style of home in Central Asia. So particularly Mongol for thousands of years. So ang yurt TI is kanang construct mga 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 Mongol yapon sila but these are kapilid ano is mga nomadic people which is gabuid sila o atong gabuid og mga horse o mga kanyero. So ang kani ang North Korea is ginaran circle ni siya na tolda which is ginatapakan siya og panit power and it's up to you kung saan mo siya pagkuhan. As you can see sa slide o sa picture na kaning yurt is still exist pero kani siya karon is modern na siya na yurt. So kaning yurt is ginagamit siya karon as a hotel, as a house. Kay sa una gid kaning yurt is madala-dala ra mo siya kay mura rin siya tent ng wood. So as you can see sa picture nanay mga lights, nanay bangko sa gawas, nanay mga design diba. So ga-exist pa yan. Nomadic herders is belongs to the Mongols. So kaya sila is mayo kaya sila mga tayo. And travel pod sila sa Central Asia uban ang ilang or ginabitbit gid nila ang ilang mga kabayo, baka kanling og mga kanyero. So kaning nomadic people is mga tribe people. So that's why gisakop sila ni Genghis Khan kay pinakadako po ni sila na mga tribes sa Mongol. So gusto man si Genghis Khan na mudako iyang empire. That's why gisakop ni ang nomadic labi na kay na sila mga kabayo.
Additional information: after death of Genghis Khan in 1227, Khan dies and his empire began to change. The Khan's heirs divided his empire and it was split into Khanate separate territories. Each Khanate was ruled by one of his sons. The Mongol Peace. From 1200 to 1300, the Mongol rulers imposed a period of stability and law and order in most of Eurasia. They allow safe passage of trade caravans, travelers, and missionaries from one end of the empire to another. Many historians believe that it was his peaceful time when the bubonic plague spread throughout Europe and Asia.
The Mongol dynasty. In 1279, Kublai Khan, or the grandson to Genghis, established a new Chinese dynasty called Yuan after he conquered the Song dynasty. He ruled in China until his death in 1294 and called himself the Great Khan in 1260. So, his capital was called Khanbalig, or later known as Beijing. So, kanili si Kublai Khan is apo na siya ni Genghis. Si Kublai Khan ang nagtukod sa bag-o na dynasty sa China na gitawag og Yuan dynasty, or known as Mongol dynasty. So actually kani Mongol is old name gud ni siya. Kon lang gid siya isa na. Gialisdan lang siya ni Kublai Khan tong siya na ang himong leader sa Mongol. So, ang Song Dynasty ay maoy ang usa ka imperial na dynasty sa China nagsugo sa niadtong 960. So, kaning Song Dynasty is mas una pa ni siya sa Mongol dynasty ni Genghis Khan. So kaniting dynasty na Song dynasty kaniting Song dynasty is kanang gitukod din siya ni Emperor Taiso. So si Genghis Khan ay is kanang gitawag siya na Great Khan in 1260 before siya namatay 2 years after his throne. Kublai Khan, he did not hate other civilization. He loved living in a set of Chinese empire on the border between the Mongolia and China. So, kanina si Kublai Khan, because of his rule, ginaalaw niya or ginatugutan niya ang ubang reliyon na magbutang og rule to them, but that rule or freedom is limited lang. So, his enormous palace impressed the European explorer Marco Polo, who called it the largest that was ever seen. He spent most of his life in China, unlike the other Khans. So, kanina ang kadako sa palasyo na nakadayag sa European na si Marco Polo, nga nagtawag sa kinadakan na nagsukad na iyang gigugol iyang kaugalingon sa pag-explore in other mga laylay na country. So, goal gid ni Marco Polo as a explorer is may magsik og ideas para po kung unsa iyang makita sa ana na place is yatag pud niya ideas sa iyang mga isip niya na padaron. So one good example is katong money paper. Ang China gid ang first na nagbuhat sa money paper. So that's why siguro na yung mga money paper na kay sa una gid kay coins manggod. So I think that's all.
The decline of the Mongol Empire. So there are factors that probably caused the decline of the Mongol Empire. First is despite the great military accomplishments, the Mongol Empire only lasted 3 to 4 generations. Second, they were great conquerors but horrible administrators. Third is overexpansion, as seen in the failed invasion of Japan, and overspending rivalries among Mongol leaders. By 1350, most Mongol territories have been conquered by other armies.
The Mongols were too focused on conquest and not on governing. The empire was also too diverse, the land was too vast, and the empire had weak rulers and political instability. The Black Death also wiped out a majority of the population.
Rebellions. There are 4 main rebellions during the Yuan dynasty or Mongolians happened. First, main rebellions broke out in China in 1300s, Western Han Dynasty, Tang Dynasty, Ming Dynasty, and etc. Second, Kublai Khan's added to the already deep resentment the Chinese had for Mongolians who ruled in China and caused them great humiliation. Third, rebellions were also foiled by years of famine, flood, and disease, as well as economic decline. Fourth, eventually, the Mongolian presence declined and only a few remain.
Other information, lasting legacy. The empire adapted constantly as it grew and flourished during a 162 years long period of aggressive expansion. At the empire's peak, Mongols controlled up to 12 million square miles, but Genghis Khan's death in 1227 ultimately doomed the empire he founded. Disputes among his successors eventually split the empire into four. By 1368, all four had folded. The Mongol Empire had gained a reputation for destroying its enemies, and it spread terror and panic as news of the cities they had razed preceded them.
Genghis Khan's contribution spurred world trade. The resulting stability brought by Mongol rule opened these ancient trade routes to a largely undistributed exchange of goods between people from Europe and East Asia. He united the world by incorporating enemies into his army, spread out throughout his empire. Merit-based army. He promoted people based on individual merit, promoted cultural tolerance in his empire. He established freedom of religion.
What can we learn from the Mongols? Have an end in mind. For the Mongol warrior, there was no such thing as individual honor in battle if the battle was lost. Lead from the front. To the things or behave the way that one advises, dictates, or espouses. Serve a great good than yourself. To serve a cause greater than yourself. Have a vision. You imagine them in that situation. For example, because you are worried that it might happen or hope that it will happen. Be self-reliant. Be humble. Be moderate. Understand your people.
The greatest happens is to scatter your enemy and drive him before you, to see cities reduced to ashes, to see those who love him shrouded in tears, and to gather to your bosom his wife and daughters, Genghis Khan. This quote is one of the famous 50 quotes created by Genghis Khan, quotes to bring out the warrior in you. These ferocious Genghis Khans quotes are from a man who rose from a modest beginning and became the leader of the one largest empire in the world history. So when Genghis Khan was 9, his father was poisoned in other tribes and his mother was kicked out from their tribe and forced to raise Genghis Khan on himself. And later on, Genghis Khan and his wife were captured and enslaved, but Genghis managed to escape and establish himself as a fierce warrior. Genghis Khan ruled over 1 million people and killed many more than that yet. As a ruler, he was very forward-thinking. He was tolerant of other religions and often tried to treat peacefully before resorting to violence. These Genghis Khan quotes reflect the leader who united the world into one empire.